They never noticed me, and that was the first mistake they made without even realizing it. I was always present, standing close enough to hear their conversations, their laughter, their careless confessions, yet invisible enough to be ignored completely. They spoke freely around me, assuming my silence meant I had nothing to offer, no influence, no relevance. I listened without reacting, absorbing every detail, every shift in tone, every unguarded truth they revealed when they thought no one important was paying attention. While they fought loudly for recognition and approval, I learned the discipline of restraint. I understood that silence creates space, space to observe, to think, and to prepare. When people ignore you, they lower their defenses. They expose patterns, weaknesses, and contradictions they would otherwise protect. I never interrupted them, never corrected them, never demanded acknowledgement. I stayed patient, calm, and unnoticed. In that stillness, I began to understand something most people never do: power doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it waits quietly, collecting information, letting others underestimate it. And while they continued living recklessly, convinced that control belonged to them, I began shaping an outcome they couldn't see coming, using invisibility not as a shield, but as a weapon. Day after day, I blended into the background of their world like a shadow that never drew attention. They passed by me without a second glance, talked over me in group settings, and dismissed my presence as unimportant. But with every moment of disregard, my awareness sharpened. I watched how they interacted, how influence shifted between them, and how confidence often masked insecurity. I learned who depended on shortcuts, who feared exposure, and who relied too heavily on reputation rather than substance. They believed power required volume, that strength came from dominance and visibility. Silence, to them, was weakness. I let them believe that. Silence gave me clarity. It allowed me to see connections they missed and consequences they never anticipated. While they wasted energy proving themselves to one another, I conserved mine, turning observation into preparation. I didn't rush to act or react emotionally. I understood that timing mattered more than speed. The more invisible I became, the more freely they revealed themselves. Information accumulated quietly, piece by piece, until patterns became clear and outcomes predictable. And I realized something critical: people who ignore you rarely prepare for you. That false sense of security would eventually become the foundation of their downfall. As time passed, their arrogance grew stronger, fed by the belief that no one was truly watching them. They became careless, assuming their position protected them from consequences. Secrets slipped out during casual conversations. Promises were broken without concern. Small betrayals were justified as necessary or harmless. I witnessed it all without judgment, understanding that people expose their true nature when they feel safe from accountability. I saw how loyalty faded when convenience appeared, how respect disappeared when power felt unchallenged. Their strength was an illusion built on attention and fear, and I understood that once those were removed, everything else would collapse. I never revealed my thoughts or intentions. Silence protected me, keeping my focus sharp and my plans invisible. While they celebrated short-term wins and mistook noise for progress, I documented every inconsistency, every weakness, every pattern of behavior that would later matter. I wasn't driven by anger or emotion. I was driven by clarity. True revenge isn't impulsive or loud, it's deliberate. It waits. It watches. And it moves only when the outcome is already decided. The shift didn't happen all at once. It never does. It started quietly, almost invisibly, with small changes that felt insignificant on the surface. A missed opportunity here, a delayed response there, a subtle misunderstanding that lingered longer than it should have. To anyone watching casually, it looked like bad luck or coincidence. To me, it was momentum. I didn't force outcomes or rush events. I simply nudged things in the right direction and allowed human nature to do the rest. They grew frustrated as situations stopped favoring them, yet they couldn't identify the cause. Confidence slowly gave way to irritation. Still, they never looked in my direction. I remained the same quiet presence they had learned to ignore. That consistency protected me. Every adjustment I made blended naturally into their routine, leaving no fingerprints behind. I understood then that the most effective influence is subtle. Loud interference creates resistance, quiet guidance creates inevitability. They blamed circumstances, timing, and each other, never realizing that the silence they dismissed was actively shaping their reality. Invisibility gave me freedom, and freedom gave me control. As pressure increased, cracks began to form where certainty once lived. Trust weakened, conversations changed, and confidence fractured into suspicion. They started questioning one another, replaying past moments, searching for explanations that never satisfied them. I watched calmly as their unity dissolved from the inside. Emotional reactions replaced logic, and pride interfered with clarity. Every response they had followed a pattern I had already anticipated. People who rely on dominance struggle the most when control slips away. I stayed patient, resisting the urge to accelerate the process. Timing mattered more than satisfaction. Silence continued to shield me, allowing the chain reaction to unfold without interruption. They mistook chaos for randomness, never realizing it followed a precise sequence. Each doubt amplified the next, each mistake compounded the last. I didn't need to confront anyone or expose anything prematurely. The structure they depended on was collapsing under its own weight. All I had to do was remain still and let gravity take over. By the time unease settled into their daily lives, the balance of power had already shifted completely. They could feel it, though they couldn't explain it. The same people who once ignored me now sensed something different, an absence of control, a quiet tension they didn't understand. I hadn't changed outwardly. I was still calm, still reserved, still silent. But internally, everything was different. I no longer needed their approval or acknowledgement. Their reactions confirmed what I already knew: desperation makes people careless. Mistakes multiplied. Decisions became rushed. The louder they grew, the quieter I became. Silence gave me clarity while noise blinded them. This was never about anger or proving a point. It was about balance, about allowing actions to meet consequences at the right moment. Victory doesn't need an announcement. It arrives quietly, settles firmly, and waits patiently for recognition, if it ever comes at all. There comes a moment when silence becomes impossible to ignore. Not because it grows louder, but because everything else starts to fall apart around it. That moment arrived without drama, without warning. The systems they trusted no longer worked the way they expected. People they relied on hesitated. Plans that once seemed foolproof failed at the smallest pressure. Confusion replaced certainty. I watched them scramble for answers, replaying conversations, questioning intentions, trying to trace the origin of their problems. They looked everywhere except where the truth stood quietly waiting. I understood then that awareness often comes too late. By the time people recognize the real source of change, their options have already narrowed. Silence had done its work patiently, stripping away illusions layer by layer. This wasn't chaos, it was exposure. They were finally seeing the consequences of habits they ignored and decisions they justified. And I remained still, untouched, because preparation creates distance from panic. Where they reacted emotionally, I stayed deliberate. Where they rushed, I waited. Power had shifted completely, not through confrontation, but through inevitability. Their attempts to regain control only deepened their mistakes. Fear disguised itself as confidence, urgency replaced strategy, and pride refused to accept reality. I recognized these behaviors instantly because I had studied them long before they appeared. When people feel cornered, they reveal their worst instincts. They overextend, speak too much, and trust the wrong voices. Every move they made confirmed the outcome I had already prepared for. I didn't interfere or accelerate their decline. I allowed it to unfold naturally, knowing that interference would only create resistance. Silence kept me detached, objective, and focused. There was no satisfaction in watching them struggle, only confirmation. Confirmation that loud power collapses when challenged by quiet precision. They mistook my calm for absence and my restraint for weakness. By the time understanding reached them, the path back no longer existed. Consequences had already taken root. Silence hadn't punished them, it had simply removed the illusion that protected them. When everything finally settled, there was no dramatic ending, no public victory, no announcement of triumph. Just clarity. The noise faded, the tension dissolved, and what remained was balance. They understood, even if they never said it out loud. I saw it in their hesitation, in the way they avoided eye contact, in how conversation shifted when I entered the room. Recognition doesn't always come as an apology or admission. Sometimes it arrives as silence, the same silence they once dismissed. I didn't seek acknowledgement. I didn't need validation. The outcome spoke for itself. I had moved beyond reaction and into control, beyond emotion and into awareness. Silence had changed me as much as it changed the situation. It taught me patience, discipline, and the value of restraint. The strongest weapon isn't force, it's understanding. And once you understand how people operate, you no longer need to confront them. You simply let them confront themselves. This was never about revenge in the traditional sense. There was no anger fueling it, no desire to hurt for the sake of satisfaction. It was about alignment, allowing actions to meet consequences without interference. Silence gave me the space to see clearly, to act deliberately, and to remain untouched by the chaos that consumed others. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't defend myself. I didn't explain my intentions. I said nothing. And that was my greatest advantage. Silence protected me while exposing them. It allowed time to work in my favor and patience to become power. Most people underestimate quiet strength because they don't understand it. They mistake stillness for weakness and restraint for fear. But silence isn't empty, it's observant, strategic, and precise. And when used correctly, it doesn't just change outcomes. It defines them.